Coming up on tonight's show.
I think the finding which stands out the most for me is that the potential and the mid case, as we're calling it, we have a high case and a low case. The mid case could show that by 2030, Papua New Guinea could be earning over $23 billion per annum from export revenues in natural resources. That's an extraordinary number.
Good evening. I'm Leanne Gerari. Welcome to the program. We'll have that interview a bit later on in the show. The O'Neill Dion government has taken a bold approach towards some of its reforms. While some of the government's nationalization reforms have been praised for supporting and protecting indigenous businesses and activities that are of national interest, others have stated that these reforms have somewhat caused an unease amongst investors and the private sector itself. The recent takeover of the Oktedi mine is a prime example. While government has been praised for this brave move, others have highly criticized the takeover, while a handful still remain skeptical, watching closely and waiting to see what might happen next. With all that has happened, the question is, has investor confidence been affected or is it still intact? Here's Dennis Herrera with this special report.
This year, the government has taken aggressive steps towards nationalizing selected businesses in PNG. These were businesses that the government saw as those that were of national interest. In July, the SME summit held in Medang came up with a 21-point communique. This communique includes a recommendation for the expansion of the current reserve list.
10% of the formal economic sector is owned and controlled by Papua New Guineans, 90% by outsiders. We are reduced to mere spectators. We pick up the people on the streets, we tell them, boy to solista, sumuk to solista. We've gone to the point of removing the reserve list, so they've overtaken everything. They've gone to the district, gone to the villages, they've overtaken everything. And successive governments have allowed that to go on, and set in the prices and everybody else involved.
The government confirmed not long after that the 21-point communique will soon be legislated and implemented. The National SME Policy and Master Plan Consultative Workshop was held recently at the Gateway Hotel in Port Moresby. It was aimed at capturing relevant information for the formulation of the National SME Policy and National SME Development Master Plan. Prior to the National SME Policy and Master Plan Consultative Workshop, the PNG Advantage 2013 International Investment Summit was also held at the Gateway Hotel in Port Moresby. The summit was dedicated entirely to the promotion of business and investment in PNG. Also in July, Mining Minister Byron Chen announced that the government was considering ownership of the Xstrata-operated Frida River mine in West Sepik Province. Not long after that, Minister for Trade, Commerce and Industry Richard Maru announced during a press conference that there would be a change in the takeover code for the Security Commission of PNG, preventing Kulim Malaysia in acquiring a majority stake in New Britain Palm Oil Limited. Kulim Malaysia's appeal to the National Court of PNG was subsequently rejected.
We now have a situation where you have one big company that basically owns the oil palm industry in this country, New Britain Palm Oil, which is owned by Kulim, the biggest shareholder, which is a Malaysian company, and other farmers and other companies, individuals who are, because it's a company that listed on both the Port Moresby Stock Exchange and the London Stock Exchange. Now the government does not want Kulim Limited of Malaysia to take up any more shares in New Britain Palm Oil. We would like more shares to be acquired by Papua New Guinea individuals, Papua New Guinea companies, institutional shareholders, and the provincial governments in the provinces where they operate.
There has also been the prolonged arbitration between Nautilus Minerals and the state over the Solwarawan undersea mining project. The arbitration has resulted in the state being ordered to pay 295 million kina to Nautilus Minerals. On September 18, The government acquired the shares in Oktedi Mining Limited, previously owned by majority shareholder PNG Sustainable Development Program. This was after Parliament passed amendments to the Oktedi Mining Agreement for the government to have 100% ownership of the Oktedi mine. The bill was passed with 62 members of Parliament voting for the bill and no one going against. The National Executive Council has since then appointed new members to the board of OTML, resulting in the removal of Semekere Morauta as chairman. Semekere stated through a paid advertisement in the National this week that Parliament's passing of amendments to the Oktedi 10th Supplemental Agreement last month has opened the way for other agreements and contracts with the state to be broken. He said businesses that have joint ventures or other partnerships with the state, especially in the resources sector, face the prospect of having their rights and assets stripped away. Semekere said the interests of major resource companies such as Oil Search, ExxonMobil, Newcrest, the Morobe Mining Joint Venture and many others have been endangered. Dr. Ray Anere, Senior Research Fellow in Governance and Program Leader for Improving Governance Program at the National Research Institute, made his comments regarding the issue.
International experience has shown that where nationalization of businesses is involved, that would lead to state control and ownership. Government and public sector bodies generally do not respond efficiently and effectively to market signals as and when those signals occur. So, for example, in this instance, the downturn in international demand for minerals and exports in the mineral sector, which will be the current market signal. Now, would that market signal be read correctly and appropriately by the government of Papua New Guinea? The current move by having to nationalize and allow for some degree of state ownership and control sends that kind of message to investors generally, but more particularly to the Oktedi Mining Limited.
During parliamentary debate on the Oktedi 10th Supplemental Agreement, which was eventually passed and resulted in the cancellation of PNG STP's share in OTML and the issue of new shares to the state, ECP Governor and former Prime Minister Sir Michael Somare warned of the implications of passing such a bill. Premier international business news site Bloomberg featured the Oktedi issue the next day. Melbourne-based mining giant BHP Billiton, which owns PNG STP, stated that PNG's decision to make the company liable for environmental damage caused by the Oktedi mine raises the nation's sovereign risk. The Australian Financial Review reported that the expropriation which Prime Minister Peter O'Neill has announced with regards to the Oktedi mine amplifies the sovereign risk of investment in PNG. So, are the efforts by the government to have either full or majority control of businesses in the country affecting investor confidence? Business PNG caught up with Executive Director for the PNG Business Council, Doveri Henao, who commented on the issue.
The way that investment works is usually a due diligence takes its course, and they normally look at how the regulatory framework operates. Is it robust? And if it is, then certain investment tracks are then given over a certain period of time. If there is a disruption in that, because investment doesn't get into the country now, once a decision is made, it's actually 2-3 years' time. So if there are policies and legal issues that are not resolved, or well, make that environment unpredictable, then the 2-3 years down the line on significant investment, they will be rethought. They will be readjusted, and possibly they'll actually move on. So Sir Michael does have a point in his particular comment in Parliament. But again, Dennis, the critical thing here is if you do shake a predictable, stable environment of investment, then that will naturally have effect on investment confidence, investor confidence in the country.
Dr. Ray Anere made his comments regarding the recent turn of events.
It's probably a little early to tell in terms of the current move in relation to the Sustainable Development Program and the Octedi mine is already taking effects. I think it's a little early to tell. But on the whole, and generally speaking, what the current move could do or might happen as a consequence is that if the government is not careful and limits or compromises the freedom of business activities, business firms, and the flexibility that is required by business firms to operate in a sustainable and profitable way. To the extent that government control, government involvement compromises the freedom and the flexibility of business houses, to the point that that occurs, that would have the effect of undermining investor confidence on the government of Papua New Guinea.
Craig Michaels, Melbourne-based Associate Director of Sovereign Ratings at Standard & Poor's, told The Australian that the business community would be watching the impact of the Octedi move closely. He said the PNG government is highly reliant on the resources sector, so any damage to the sector will have a big impact on the economy and on government revenues. Bank of PNG Governor Loy Bakani, upon presenting the monetary policy statement last month, commented on the issue of investor confidence with regards to the government's nationalisation approach.
There is no signs of anything adverse happening at the moment. But we are saying potential, as part of warning the government that if those kind of things the way they handle things like that, especially to do with the private sector, then there is obviously some level of uncertainty to be created by those kind of actions. The Octedi, in terms of production, won't be, as the Prime Minister said, it won't affect production. It's only the ownership. The mine will continue, people will be still there, working and all that.
The PNG Chamber of Mines and Petroleum executives expressed their views after the government's takeover of shares for the Octedi mine.
Yes, well, making the point, this has been an issue that's gone on for quite a long time, and people overseas don't necessarily understand the full gambit of what's going on here, and we're just expressing this concern that it's maybe damaging our investor image and our investor confidence. And it's important to realise that the mining industry at the moment is in quite a serious downturn on a worldwide basis, which is having quite an impact on Papua New Guinea. So it's very important, especially important at the moment, that we nurture our investor image. Octedi's a wonderful long-term asset. It's well managed, independently managed, and it's important that we maintain that wonderful asset.
Papua New Guinea has long been known as a good destination for resource companies, highly prospective minerals, and obviously with the boom of the gas industry as well. So it's really important for all of us as stakeholders to ensure that we maintain that positive image and continue to encourage good investors to come into our country. And so that's really the position of the Chamber, is that while we understand the circumstances perhaps around the situation at Octedi, for the industry's sake we need to continue to maintain that level of confidence within the investor market.
We've had a few issues recently. We've had the Nautilus arbitration. We've had the Freda River. We're trying to attract new partners for Freda River in partnership with government and so on. So there's a lot of important issues that can be impacted by this.
Other countries have done extensive nationalisation projects in the past. Fiji is one example, where Air Pacific took back shares from Qantas, while the government took over majority shares for the Fiji Times, which previously belonged to News Corporation. In Malaysia, the Bumiputra policy was put in place in the 1970s by the government, which had the goal of eradicating poverty and restructuring the economy to eliminate the identification of ethnicity with economic function. It was to create opportunities and to diffuse inter-ethnic tensions following the extended violence against Chinese Malaysians in the May 13 incident in 1969. At the recent Medang SME Summit, this Malaysian model was proposed to be adopted in PNG. In other major nationalization examples, the Castro government gradually expropriated all foreign-owned private companies after the Cuban Revolution of 1959. In 1972, the Chilean government led by Salvador Allende nationalized the copper mining industry. On July 26, 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal Company. The year 1972 also saw Indian nationalization of 106 insurance companies into 4.
I think there has to be a clear definition on government involvement, because that's really where the issue is. When you government plays multiple roles. From an investment point of view, they're regulators, they're also policymakers, and they're also lawmakers. They initiate the law reform. Now, if you're going to have a government that cannot make those distinctions as a regulator and as a policymaker, or have a process that works towards that, that's obviously going to have a major effect on investment, not just internationally, but domestically as well.
So there are mixed reactions to the government's nationalization approach. As the discussion continues, more concrete analysis, findings and recommendations can be made on the way forward.
Stay tuned. When we come back, David Kahn hosts an interview with ANZ CEO Mark Baker and Director of Port Jackson. If you've just joined us, you're watching Business PNG. This morning, ANZ showcased a bold report. Titled Bold Thinking, Imagining PNG in the Asian Century, the report promotes an insight of why Papua New Guinea needs to align itself with Asia. Commissioned by ANZ, the report states some of the opportunities present for PNG in this so-called Asian century, as well as the need for balanced growth within 3 main sectors: the resource sector, the infrastructure sector, and the agricultural sector. Here's David Kahn interviewing the CEO for ANZ Papua New Guinea, Mark Baker, and the Director of Port Jackson Partners, Grant Mitchell.
Welcome back to Business PNG. With me in the studio, Grant Mitchell, the Director of Port Jackson Partners, who's just been working with us on a presentation, the Port Moresby Chamber Breakfast, and Mark Baker, the CEO of ANZ in Papua New Guinea. Gentlemen, welcome to the studio. Bold thinking, PNG in the Asian century you're talking about this morning. Where did this idea come from, Mark? It's something you've been building for quite a while? Or?
It is. It's actually the 4th in a series of what we call ANZ Insight. And ANZ Insight is designed to prompt discussion and prompt debate around what we see as serious policy issues, amongst other things. The first 3 have been focused in Australia, and they're on natural resources and agriculture. And the 4th, which is, as you say, it's really around trying to imagine the opportunities for Papua New Guinea in the Asian century. But this is the first time we've done it at a country level. And it really came about from a visit by our group CEO, Mike Smith, in February, where we tested out some of the findings that we have around this area. And the reaction was extraordinary, both in Papua New Guinea and importantly overseas as well, because there's really a lack of material around the longer term view and visions for PNG beyond the government's own 2050.
Well, we're really not very good at long term views, are we? I mean, it's something we're ready to look at now. So, Grant, you focused on 3 main sectors. What were they?
So we talk in detail about resources and agriculture and infrastructure.
Yes.
And we want to focus on those sectors because they're very important to PNG and the flourishing of its economy and development, but also because they can work together in a way that delivers what we call in the report balanced growth, right? Which is a really important objective for PNG over the longer term.
We are essentially seen as a resource economy. We don't have that balance. So you talked about the resource sector basically crowding out the rest. Is that what's happened? And
It's what could happen if you deliver on the potential of the resource sector
Yes.
without delivering on the potential of the other sectors. You know, it's a misconception that a lot of fast-growing economies elsewhere are either one sector or another sector, right? But in fact, it's much more likely that high-quality growth occurs across lots of different sectors of the economy together, and that's the objective, and that's the objective of PNG, and that's why we structured the report in the way.
Mark,
we
it's
have.
quite a fabulous story, really, when you look at the potential of what. I mean, give us a sense of what the report brought out.
I think the finding which stands out the most for me is that the potential and the mid case, as we're calling it, we have a high case and a low case. The mid case could show that by 2030, Papua New Guinea could be earning over $23 billion per annum from export revenues in natural resources. That's an extraordinary number. However,
So that's well over double what we are now.
correct. But however, what it does require between now and then is up to and around $112 billion of investment, and that's the critical piece of this around attracting investment into the country.
That's a big figure, right?
Yeah.
Achievable?
I think it can be achieved if there are a couple of important sort of improvements made. I mean, one of the things we talk about in the report is the fact that if you ask resource in sector investors how they might compare PNG to about 100 other countries, the ranking in terms of attractiveness is 73rd at the moment. But if you get them to imagine what it could be if everything went well and if the right policies were put in place, that number is 3rd in the world. And so, you know,
by
thinking
by the same token, I could be Bill Gates. I mean,
oh, that's right. But I think what we try and work out in
If
the
everything
report
goes
is
right,
because it's really around investment risk, right? If you can set up an agenda for the resource sector that's about managing risk and then in the longer term broadening out benefits,
but
it's a
and
real way
Mark,
forward.
you've said you've taken the mid case. You've not gone to the high. You've decided to take the mid case, which I guess then, from a banker, is a conservative look at it.
Yeah.
So, so that would be the kicker for the rest of the economy. I mean, what would the link then be to agriculture?
Oh, well, I think for agriculture, for example, there's the opportunity to, you know, certainly supply mining companies that will need to bring their local workforces. There's also a kicker for the way in which skills can be adapted from mining into agriculture, right? There's a lot of generalist skills that mining companies need.
Yeah, that's something many people would say we missed the boat on this the first ship.
Well,
I guess if we talk about LNG, PNG was caught a bit by surprise is maybe not the right term.
Well, and that's right, but now everybody knows that the boat is in the process of sailing, if I could put it that way.
The boat's sailed.
And there's an opportunity now, if the resource potential is delivered, for several projects in sequence to need training capacity, right? So the skills legacy can live on.
Yeah. Come back to the infrastructure one, Mark. I mean, obviously a huge spend needed. I mean, is it all just let's build roads, bridges, wharfs, and they will come, or?
No, I think the report talks quite specifically around quality infrastructure and around the ability for infrastructure to have multi-use. So not just for resources, but how can infrastructure also be used to assist with the agricultural sector? So infrastructure is something which needs clearly very careful planning, but also just to make sure that the right kind of infrastructure is being put in place. There's also a piece in the report which talks about roads and just around the very ambitious targets which are there, and actually
of the existing government
from the existing government plans, and actually the numbers there in terms of what could be required are extraordinary as a percentage of GDP. So the message in the report really is around.
Welcome back. Earlier this morning, ANZ delivered their report titled Bold Thinking, Imagining PNG in the Asian Century. The findings in this report are significant and demonstrate the need for bold thinking to secure PNG's enormous potential and PNG's opportunities in this Asian century. The report, which is part of ANZ's Insights series, also stressed the need to develop agribusiness in the country.
Come on to one of the major focuses of the report, agriculture. I mean, there was a question this morning that SME development, Mark, and tourism did not get a big play in this. Was that deliberate?
No, I think when you look at the report's focusing around sectors. So it's focusing around natural resources, agriculture, and infrastructure. If you look at agriculture, the success of agriculture will be largely driven by SMEs, and there's one or two big players, clearly in terms of New Britain palm oil or some of the fishery industry. But actually, when you look at things like coffee, this is largely smallholders. This is SMEs in action. So it wasn't a deliberate omission, but really it feeds into the wider report anyway.
Yeah, looking at some of the figures on the graph you put up, Grant, I mean, a good segue there, Mark, into the coffee. I mean, government's saying, we want to go from 59,000 tonnes to 500,000 tonnes. Oil palm from 520,000 to basically 1,600,000 tonnes. I mean, cocoa from 58 to 310,000. These are pretty adventurous figures. Yeah.
And they are, but we start from a position where we might as well take those targets quite seriously.
Yeah. Okay.
They're
not taking your mid course; they're taking your high course.
No, that's right. But I think you have to realise when you're thinking about those targets that although the absolute numbers look, as you say, quite ambitious, right? If you think about the yield that's involved in getting there, it might only involve being as good at growing coffee as some other countries in the region. And it might only involve bringing some, admittedly, a large increase in land under use of a quite large land bank that currently isn't really used.
So what's happening in Asia? What is it you're seeing in Asia that you think PNG should be getting into that? What are you seeing?
Look, I think there's at least two things. One of them is that the sort of demand that Mark was sort of just talking about, right? In a lot
of... Is that just from a middle class burgeoning?
Part of it is, but part of it is really broader than that. It's just about general economic development. And it's also about the way in which people participating in that development tastes change over time, as Mark talks about. So demands for goods at higher levels of income that people don't necessarily think that they want earlier. And I think the other important change is that there's a change in the way in which global capital markets are structured, and investors from Asia are becoming more active and a larger proportion of global investment. And both of those are positive developments for PNG.
What happens to existing links? I mean, clearly Australia's Papua New Guinea's major trading partner. Would they see this as a threat as we move towards Asia? Or?
I'm not sure that Australia should. I think it's in Australia's interest to see PMD succeed on its own terms and become and deliver on the potential we're talking about. I think Australia has its own, as we've talked about in previous insights, it has its own agricultural development issues and its own resource sector issues. I think a lot of those important national questions.
But there are the naysayers saying when Australia never came at helping us with the rice industry. What's going to change? So that's why I was asking if they're going to be seen as a threat. And you've used the term Asian-centric, and in Papua New Guinea, that can people sort of think tucker boxes. It's more than that, isn't it?
Yeah,
much more than that.
How does PNG play into the two trends that I talked about before? And that, because they're long-term trends and because they're large changes, that really needs a sophisticated response. And that's part of the conversation again we're trying to engender.
Mark and Grant, fascinating report, and certainly in Papua New Guinea we need to be looking ahead like this. We don't do enough of it. You talk about a national conversation. Will we start to address these issues and grasp them? Who would be in the national conversation?
I think there's the business and government and public service leaders that are already in PNG, and we talk about the sort of things in the report that those sort of leadership figures should talk about. But there's also a sort of parallel conversation, which is the one that stakeholders maybe outside PNG in the region or more broadly need to have, that dovetails with that other conversation as well.
And what would they talk about, Mark?
Well, I think it's really getting to understand Papua New Guinea is fundamental, particularly for external investors. And from the bank's point of view, we're in 33 countries across the globe, and we talk to investors all the time. This report we're going to be launching in Beijing, Singapore, Brisbane later this week. So as much of it is actually getting an understanding that the PNG story is not well known. and the opportunities in PNG are not well known. So I think to start with is actually just getting a fundamental understanding of the opportunity, and then we can look at trying to address some of the questions around what needs to happen.
So it would be fair to say this is a vote of confidence in PNG. You guys are here.
Absolutely.
You've seen what's here. It's a vote of confidence saying what's available. Last question, Mark. Grant, can we do it?
I think the answer to that is in PNG's hands ultimately. I mean, I don't think we could have written this report maybe 15 or 10 years ago. One of the things that I said this morning is that PNG started to put runs on the board. The potential has started to be more widely appreciated, but there are still a lot of things that need to happen to capture it, and most of those are, to be frank, within PNG's own control.
Yeah, okay. With me in the studio, I had Mark Baker, the CEO for ANZ Bank in Papua New Guinea, and Grant Mitchell, the author of the latest ANZ Inside Report, Bold Thinking, Imagining PNG in the ASEAN Century. That's it from Business PNG.